On June 15th, an unimaginable tragedy occurred on Laurel Lindale Road in Monroe Township, Ohio. 3 small boys shot and killed. Police say the killings were execution style and by their own father. Prosecutors say 4-year-old Hunter was shot twice in the head. 7-year-old Clayton was shot outside and tried to run away. And 3-year-old Chase was ripped from his mother's arms before he was killed. The boy's father, Chad Doerman, taken into custody without any resisting and confessing to the heinous crimes. Now, prosecutors are saying they're going to seek the ultimate punishment for him for those murders. Tonight, we're digging deep into the accused killer's past and talking about what's next in the quest for justice for those 3 little boys. Good evening to you and welcome to Closing Arguments. I'm Julie Grant, in tonight for Vinnie Politan. We begin this hour in Claremont County, Ohio, where defendant Chad Doerman is being accused in the execution-style shooting deaths of his 3 young boys. The boys were 4-year-old Hunter, 7-year-old Clayton, and 3-year-old Chase. They were shot and killed on June 15th. And we've looked at that body camera footage together of those moments of Doerman surrendering to police. Well, tonight we have some brand new videos to show you of Chad Doerman being taken to jail, being booked in the county jail just hours after the murders of his 3 sons.
Kind of face that window on your right there for a minute. Just face it.
What's your name? Chad. Chad. What's your last name?
Doerman.
Gorman?
Doerman.
Doerman. Have you ever been here before?
I think one time for fight with Dad.
Oh, actually, it's good here. Do you have any weapons or drugs on you?
No.
Anything that's gonna poke me, stick me, or hurt me?
No.
Okay. Put your hands up there. Do a pat down and get everything out of your pockets.
That's
Sean's.
Shane.
Just taking your belt off. You see the mama's foot? Bend it up here to me. There you go. We're going to step straight up to the counter in front of that blue bag there to the left. Is he getting evidence bags or? Yeah, please. Let me see your hands. You want to take this cuff off, put your hand up here, palm down, okay? Same with this one. We're going to go down to the end of the counter and down here, and we're going to hang a left.
You guys stressing him out now?
Yeah. Turn left. You're fine. You can put your hands down to your side. Be a gown.
Yeah.
What size shoe you wear? What are we doing here?
10.
Size 10 shoe. Go ahead and take your shirt off and hand it to me. Phone call? Once we get done with the process and they're finished with you, yes, we'll let you make a phone call. Hold on a second. Those jeans in there.
Yeah.
And take your boxers off. see in the mouth. Lift your tongue. Take one finger, go around your gum line, top and bottom, please.
Push hands through there. There you go.
North 448.
This case is something else, isn't it? We're taking a deep dive tonight, my friends, and we've brought in tremendous guests to help us do that. I want to welcome in tonight, joining us from Los Angeles, California, senior reporter for DailyMail.com, Caitlin Becker. And please check out Caitlin's great coverage on the Daily Mail Crime TikTok page as well. She's all over this story and many others. And also with us tonight, a pleasure to welcome in retired FBI special agent and lawyer Bobby Chacon, joining us from Los Angeles as well. Good evening to you both. Thank you so much for being on the program. Ooh, this case is nauseating. Nauseating, and that's probably an understatement. Could we start with the public sentiment? When I understand this guy has every right to the presumption of innocence in America. I understand he's cloaked in it as he's being booked in that jail. But what turns my stomach is when you have someone carry out crimes that are witnessed, he surrenders to police, confesses to it, and now we might see the family, what's left of the family, should I say, be tortured by a trial. It's a tough pill to swallow. Caitlin Becker, let me go to you first on this one, please. Talking to people, doing your reporting. Could you speak to that aspect of it, about how it's tough to look at someone like Chad Doerman and know that he is deserving and will receive all of the rights that every defendant receives?
It absolutely feels like the sentiment is shared by every single person that the presumption of innocence is just not something we can wrap our heads around in this case, for all of the reasons that you listed, in the addition to how horrific this crime was. You have 3 children, 3 babies under the age 7 and under, 3, 4, and 7, their lives snuffed away so callously, allegedly by their own father, their protector, who then, like you said, went on to be arrested without issue, allegedly give a confession, and then to sit there and turn around and plead not guilty and not just accept his fate is really hard for people to swallow. And you see this body cam footage. What is blurred out in the background are the victims' bodies. They're laying on the grass, pronounced dead at the scene. People are unforgiving in this case, and I don't blame them.
You're absolutely right, Caitlin. Neither do I. This is one of those cases, and I've said this with not just this one, other cases. Oh, maybe, the Florida massacre at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, which we'll talk about later in the show. When you have somebody who commits mass murders, an act of terrorism is what it is to me. I think our lawmakers need to amend our Constitution, and they get different kind of treatment than the rest of us, but that's just me. Bobby Chacon, talk to me about what a dangerous situation this was for police. I mean, people like you, God bless you, and thank you for your service. Coming on that scene, he's sitting there next to his rifle. What else could have potentially happened to law enforcement? Thank goodness they're all okay.
Well, Julie, if you hear the video, you can hear radio transmission saying, hey, we're hearing that the person is non-compliant, he's not listening to instructions, and so the other police that are arriving, they're really heightened. They don't know that he's actually now being put into handcuffs, because all you hear is there's a shooting, children are dead, he's sitting by his rifle, and he's not listening to commands. That's the worst scenario for an officer responding to a call like this, right? You can see the officer with the rifle at him, and he's clearly not listening to command, not putting his hands up, not standing up and getting on the ground. He's just non-compliant. They did a fantastic job in taking him into custody without further violence and without further emotion on their part. I mean, you can see those children, thankfully in the video they're blocked out, but those police officers can see them, it's clear as day, just a few feet away. And if you don't think that gets their emotions running high to the guy who clearly just did this to them, then they wouldn't be human. And so for them to put him under in those cuffs so calmly and so professionally. I commend them for that.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, Bobby. Thank you for that. Yes, we do too here at Court TV. Let's take a look at some more of that now. We have some body camera footage we can play of when Chad Doerman's taken into custody.
Show us your hands now. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up now. Stand up. Stand the up.
Stage and air crew is going to go ahead and fly whenever any that's going to die.
Get your hands up here. Come on, 21. Send there.
There's can confirm that there's people that need first aid, and that's the shooter. He's not complying. They need to take care of the victims. They have to shoot him and shoot him.
Man, I ain't trying to hurt nobody. We're completely sober. Never did drugs a day in my life.
21. Get the EMS over here.
Oh my gosh, Bobby, back to you on this. Anything else that you'd like to add with respect to seeing the way that they took him into custody, and also if you'd speak to, please, what it is like when you're an officer on the scene, first to respond, and you see something like that, 3 beautiful little children killed. I don't know how that can't affect you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, Julia, I wasn't first responder, but I was involved in at least 3 cases in the FBI with parents who had murdered their own children as part of the leader of the dive team, and we recovered those children. We were the first ones to put our hands on them since the killer had put them in the water, and in those instances they were the parents. And it's I had a diver on my team step away from the team. He took a leave of absence because he had children at home at the same age as some of the victims that we had to recover. It does impact you, and you see actually one of the officers in the video drop to his knees in front of one of the children as if he's going to try to render aid. It sounds to me like these injuries are devastating. There was no providing aid or comfort. These children were dead long before the police got there, but you can see him drop to his knees and he's looking at one of the victims. You know, if you don't think that officer spent a sleepless night or nights in the nights following that, a lot of these officers do have children, young children that are, similar ages. That's going to impact them for a long, long time.
You're absolutely right. I always say officers have the toughest job in America, in my opinion, and cases like this are certainly evidence of that. Speaking of evidence, we have 911 calls of the day of the shooting been released to the public. Let's take a listen now together.
Can you tell how many people have been shot?
I think 2 children.
Okay. All right. I need, what was
That
your
I've seen.
There's a girl running down the street saying that her stepfather is killing everyone in her family.
And what did the female say to you?
And she says that her stepfather is killing everybody in her house. I did. I'm on the phone with them right now.
Did she say how or what was happening?
I asked her to get in the car with me, and she said she couldn't leave her family.
Oh my gosh, that poor child. So yet another victim. Remember, these are the 3 victims right here. Clayton, who's 7, Hunter, who's 4, Chase, who's 3. These are the victims who were dead. And then their sister, who survived, and their mother, who also survived and did sustain a gunshot wound to her hand. Caitlin Becker, I want to go back to you, please, on this aspect of the story, the victims who survived and what we know about them, the daughter running down the street, filled with terror, letting the neighborhood know that dad was killing everyone at the house. What can you share us, please, about the reporting you've done on this part of the story?
Well, first of all, she's a young girl. She's a young teenager. So to imagine that not only was she witnessing one of the most horrific things that anybody could witness in their life, but she had the bravery and wherewithal to not only run away from the situation, but run for help. Where those calls were coming in from were down the street. There was an automotive shop as well as a fire department. And what we didn't get to in that phone call was the woman who was on the phone tried to get the girl to get in her car to get her to safety. And you heard her say she wouldn't leave her family, but she did apparently go over to the fire department to get help as well. So you have to imagine what was going through her head was horrific at that time, but she really did keep it together in a way that I don't know if many of us have the fortitude to do. As for the mother, 34 years old, apparently was holding the youngest, the 3-year-old, who was ripped out of her arms. And at one point, she was either trying to block the shot from him or grab the gun, and she sustained a gunshot wound to her hand. She was taken to the hospital and is being cared for. There were several GoFundMe set up for these 2 survivors to not only deal with the cost of the burials of the 3 children, but also to put this mother and daughter through trauma therapy, which I'm sure they're going to need for a very long time.
Oh, you're absolutely right about that, Caitlin. That's for sure. I can't even imagine. It's like the unthinkable, and yet we know it happened. Bobby, may I speak to you, please, about something that I haven't really heard talked a lot about, because this case seems so open and shut, right? Because we know it's like he's caught red-handed, he's surrendering, he's not really putting up any kind of a fight. But law enforcement's work doesn't stop there with that arrest and the booking that we saw in the jail tonight, that new video just out. Would you talk to us, please, about all of the things behind the scenes law enforcement are doing with this guy, especially if the intention is to support the state of Ohio's pursuit of the death penalty, as the county prosecutor announced?
Sure, you have to treat it like any other case. You can't assume that he's going to plead guilty, even though, we all see the overwhelming amount of evidence against him. You can't assume any of that. You have to assume that this is going to go to trial, and you have to treat it like that. So you have to gather your evidence, you have to do your crime scene, you have to do your interviews, you have to collect all your video. You have to analyze it as if he's going to, you have to assume he's going to get a very competent defense counsel, and he's going to go to trial. That's the way you have to assume it. You hope that that he pleads guilty or whatever, but you have to assume that he's not. You have to assume, like, you're going to test this in a trial in front of a jury. So you're going to have to get witnesses, you're going to get testimony, you're going to, hear, because of the charges that they put it before a grand jury, get an indictment. And so you have witnesses, you have physical evidence at the crime scene. You have to do his background to see, we know that he had a previous domestic violence arrest about 10 years ago, I think, with his father. And so you have to do all of that. You have to dig into his background. You have to dig into this incident. We now know that the prosecutor has stated on the record that he planned this for months. So you have to try to figure out how he was planning it. You have to look at his computer searches. You have to look at his social media. You have to talk to his friends, his co-workers, see if he talked about this. When did he buy the rifle? What did he do, in the planning phases? What steps did he take to plan this? Because they already announced he planned it. So what does that mean? What steps did he take? So you got to get all of that in a way that you can put before their jury and get a conviction. That's what they're moving towards now.
That's absolutely it. It is quite a daunting task to build a case like this, just the volume of evidence, everything you described, Bobby. The prosecutors have a lot of work ahead of them, that is for sure. And I'm so glad you mentioned that past domestic violence history with Dad. We're going to dig deep into that next. Caitlin Becker, Bobby Chacon are going to stay with me. Want you to do the same at home, please. When we come back, we'll tell you what we know about Chad Doerman and what people who know him, what they have to say about his past. Plus, here's a preview for you of what's coming up for you in our next hour of Closing Arguments. On this hour of Closing Arguments, in New Mexico, 19-year-old Alexi Trevizo charged with murder and tampering with evidence after allegedly giving birth in a hospital bathroom and leaving the baby in a trash can. Her attorney says the hospital staff knew she was pregnant before she gave birth and continued giving her morphine. So what does this mean for her defense?
They know she's pregnant because they ran the blood test and they came back. Now, they didn't tell her that she was pregnant. They didn't tell her for another 48 minutes. Well, they never told her. She learned she was pregnant when she went to the bathroom.
These are the cases that captivated the world.
Couldn't keep my life straight.
That demanded our attention.
They were killed by their own children.
That challenged the legal system and ourselves.
How in the world can a mother wait 30 days before reporting her child missing?
These are the trials that became legendary. And now you can relive them all in one place. Court TV Legendary Trials. Go to courttv.com/legendary trials to find out how to watch.
What's your name?
Chad.
Chad. What's your last name?
Doerman.
Gorman?
Doerman.
Doerman. Have you ever been here before?
I think one time for fighting with Dad.
Oh, isn't that interesting? Chad Doerman, we see they're being booked into the county jail just hours after the execution-style murders of his 3 young sons. And in that clip, he tells the officer that he's been to jail before after a fight with his dad. So what did we do? Well, we at Court TV looked into that for you, and here is what we found. Court documents tell us that in 2010, Chad Doerman was charged with domestic violence for choking his father, Keith Doerman, choking him around the neck, the document specifies. Brett Bugansky from our affiliate in Cincinnati, WCPO, spoke with Chad Doerman's father, Keith, after the triple murder this month. Take a listen.
They won't let you talk to your son?
Keith Doerman, now living in Florida, said he came back to Ohio Thursday night after he found out what happened that day on Laurel Lindale Road in Monroe Township, but said he's not allowed to talk to his son. Chad Doerman confessed to shooting and killing his 3 sons execution style. Chad's father tells us this is completely out of character for Chad, saying his son isn't violent. I don't know what went on in his personal life. It's a shocker to us we didn't see it coming. He just snapped. I could tell in his eyes he's hollow inside. That wasn't Chad standing at the arraignment. I mean, that was not him. Contrary to what the elder Doerman said, this is what Assistant Claremont County Prosecutor David Gast said in court Friday.
We know that one of the boys was able to flee into a field near the home. And again, we know from his admission, father hunted that boy down, drug him back to the property, and executed him in front of witnesses.
On Friday, we found out prosecutors charged Chad Doerman with domestic violence in 2010 for allegedly choking his father, but authorities dropped the charge. Keith Doerman told me he can't figure out why his son would have done this. A lot of stuff out there that could make you flip, and I don't think there's enough research on that, alluding to the possibility his son Chad could be suffering from mental illness, but also said, I don't know if it was financial. I don't know if it was marital. I don't know if it's work-related. I don't know. Keith defended his son, saying he was a good kid and a good father, but said, I don't want nobody to badmouth him because this is a terrible thing he did, and I'm angry at him for it, but there's something deeper inside. That's all it is.
So I'll tell you what I see. I see a person who uses violence, and if they do it once, they usually do it again and again and again until they're locked up. And isn't it a shame he didn't get locked up the first time after that charge was dismissed? So let's talk a little more about it. According to a report from the Cincinnati Enquirer, besides the alleged choking incident with his father, there's some more things. He's got about a dozen entries in the Claremont County court system. Most of them traffic violations, though. Nothing super serious. Driving without a seatbelt, operating a vehicle unsafely. Most recent charge in 2022. The biggest is the choking charge. That charge could have had him in jail and was a big indicator, an eerie foreshadowing, if you ask me, of what was to come. Let me bring back in my guests still with me, Caitlin Becker and Bobby Chacon, and want to welcome in alongside them. We have 2 more guests joining us right now. In Orlando, Florida, human behavior expert and jury consultant Susan Constantine. And in Akron, Ohio, criminal defense attorney and trial advocacy professor Don Malarsic. Susan and Don, welcome to you both. Wow, if this isn't a power panel before me, I am... wow. Okay, can't wait to pick your brains on this one. My mind's racing. I have so many questions. Let's start with people who use violence. When you see someone like this who allegedly chokes his father and charges gets dismissed because dad reportedly just doesn't show up to court, the state can't do anything with that, he goes back home. We have a neighbor who tells Tanya O'Rourke from our affiliate in Cincinnati, WCPO, that Chad Doerman was angry and abusive to his family every single day, his wife and his kids. Take a listen.
You felt like he was just angry, generally speaking.
He was every day. Heard him. There wasn't a day he didn't yell at his wife and kids out there.
What would he yell?
All kinds of shit. He was just angry. He knew what he was doing. He planned it. It was premeditated. He shouldn't have a bond. He should never see daylight again, ever in his life. And I think they should execute him The same way he did his sons is the way he needs to go out.
I agree with the neighbor there. Susan Constantine, let me begin with you, if I may, please. In addition to being a body language expert and jury consultant, you also have expertise in the area of domestic violence. You've done work in the domestic violence prevention movement, working with victims. Talk to me, please, about what you see going on with this guy and the pattern that seems to have presented itself.
You know, I've looked at the videos, and this is what I see. This guy has a lot of what we call self-hatred. He is very self-loathing. He's a type of person that has a feeling of self-defeatism. This is where all of his anger is coming from. It's not other people. It's about how he feels about himself. You can see it in his eyes, that depth, that deep emotional sadness. He has an issue with a lack of emotional control. So when he can't control his emotions, this is how he expresses it, and a horrible thing that he's done. But this didn't happen just then. This had been building up for a long time, as we know that what he did to his father, and the screaming and yelling, what we hear from the neighbor. So before what we call the big bang, the actual shooting, there are precursors that bring that person to that point. So there are always lots of hints before the actual bang happens. The problem is people, like even his dad, is explaining it away. He's trying to come to his defense. But when people see these precursors of preeminent violence, they have to act then. Because this is what happens when they don't get the help they should have, because this guy obviously has a lot of serious emotional issues.
He sure does. Susan, thank you for all of that. Yeah, I think about his dad and some of what he said to members of the media. I know in an article I read that he spoke with the New York Post, he said that his son probably hid a lot from him. And at first I thought, oh, wow, maybe. But then when I heard about the choking incident, I'm thinking, no, he gave you the most enormous red flag. Not that they could have predicted this. Of course, I feel sorry for his parents. They're victims in this too. They lost their 3 beautiful grandchildren. But that is a serious red flag with that attack on Dad and then the attack on the boys. Don Malarsic, let me go to you on this one, please. This guy is going to need a lot of help. He is going to need a tremendous defense attorney like yourself. You do death penalty cases. You are death penalty certified. You've done many of them, tried countless homicides. You teach trial advocacy. Take us behind the scenes. Let's pull back the curtain a bit. If you get this guy and you're representing him, what do you do? What are you doing right now with Chad Doerman, please, Don?
Well, right now, Julie, what I'm doing is assembling my team. And what we want to do is the what seems to be answered, right? There's a 911 call. There's an eyewitness to the murders. There's a body cam video. There's an alleged confession. That's the what. And we are really still on step 2 out of 100 steps. So right now, a good defense attorney is getting his or her team together, and you are doing an absolute top to bottom background investigation going back 3 generations. We talked about patterns. And I think it's telling that his father was the victim of domestic violence. And what did his father do? Why were the charges dropped? Because his father walked away. If your son has committed a crime against you, that's a cry for help. That's a red flag. And the opposite of hate isn't, the opposite of love isn't hate. The opposite of love is apathy. And this father, knowing that his son was in crisis, walked away. So that's something I really want to look at. Where did Chad experience violence? Was it in the home? Was he in a foster care system? What do his school records say? What are the mental health issues? Go back 3 generations and look for patterns of violence, patterns of mental health issues, patterns of trauma. Those are the things that will answer the why.
And that's important for you to know, isn't it, Don, defending him? That would come later in the second phase of the trial, assuming there's a conviction when you try to save his life, right?
100%. This isn't really about guilt, innocence right now. It's about saving your client's life.
Don Malarsic, thank you for that. Caitlin Becker, I want to go back to you, please. All of the reporting you have done, check out the Daily Mail's TikTok crime page, and you're all over this story. Have you discovered anything in your research that hits on the why? Because I think so many of our wonderful viewers at home are wondering, why in the world did this happen? Is there anything you've come across that even scratches the surface as to that, please?
The truth of the matter is the why doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's really never anything that we can find that will say A has led to B, even if it's correlated. There's just never really any causation. We do know that shortly before the murders, he had updated and changed some of his Facebook profile photos to a lot of the photos that we've actually been seeing on the show tonight, to photos of his 3 sons and photos of him with those 3 sons. I don't know if there was any connection to that, but that did stick out to me in my reporting, that it seemed odd that he, who's not very much a prolific social media user, went ahead and updated all of those images to include what would then become his alleged victims. But not a lot of people are speaking out about him other than his father, and his father seems to be kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth. And, in the same interview, he will say that he doesn't know what caused this. His son has no history of mental health issues. He had never shown any sort of predilection towards violence. And then on the other side says something clearly made him snap. I don't know what it was. It could have been these things. There could have been other things going on here. So it does seem like the people who knew him closest in his life really didn't know him at all.
That's a good way to put it, Caitlin, talking out of both sides of his mouth. I'm sure he is at a loss for anything to say at this point. His 3 grandkids gone, his son probably headed to death row. The prosecutor wants to put him there. Bobby Chacon, let's talk about what's going on with him while he is locked up awaiting trial. Would you talk about the harsh realities of that? And does this guy have a target on his back, so to speak?
Well, possibly later on, but right now he's probably under a suicide watch, I would imagine. The correctional facility people know these types of cases do generate this kind of stuff. Last thing they want to do is have this guy harm himself in jail, because it's happened before and it leaves a real stain on those correctional facilities. And so they're probably having him under a suicide watch. He's probably getting, in the process, there's going to be court-ordered psychiatric evaluations. So they want to keep him safe. They want to keep him, I hate to use the word comfortable, but they want to keep him, well, if you will. This is not the time. He hasn't been convicted of anything. He shouldn't be punished. He should just be held in a safe way to get those psychiatric evaluations and to move forward with the prosecution of this case. So they're doing all those things. Hopefully they're keeping him safe. They're keeping him fed and well enough so that they can get those evaluations and the prosecution, and he can aid in his own defense, and he can make court appearances as needed.
Excellent insight from you all. Bobby Chacon, Caitlin Becker, we have to say goodbye to you both. Thank you so much for coming on the program tonight and lending us all of that. Susan Constantine and Don Malarczyk are going to stay with me. We're going to continue this deep dive, my friends. When we come back, we're going to talk about what the prosecution is doing, how they want to seek the death penalty against Chad Doerman. What does that mean? What do things look like in terms of justice for that family and justice for Clayton, Hunter, and Chase?
A woman and her 1-year-old son found dead in a park.
Now the child's father stands trial for their murders.
An ex-Border Patrol agent's life hangs in the balance in this high-stakes death penalty trial.
This dirt trail will tell a story. Baby Dominic was being hunted, but not by a creature, not by an animal, but by his own father.
The Mistress and Child Murder Trial. Live coverage continues Wednesday morning at 8/7 Central on Court TV.
Get him right here. You got him on the porch.
We've asked. That's the last place we've been told.
You show me your hands now! Stand up and walk towards us! Stand up now! Walk towards us! Stand up with your hands up!
Official reports from the Claremont County Sheriff's Office shed some light on what the responding officers saw when they were dispatched to the home where those 3 children were murdered earlier this month. Now, one of those responding officers was Deputy Seth Sparks. I want to show you now some of what he put into his report, saying, in part, I observed the male seated on the porch and could hear a female screaming. I began giving the male verbal commands to stand up and walk towards me. At this time, I could see what I believed to be a brown long rifle next to the shooter's left hand. Due to the need to assess the injuries to the victims, we began to approach Chad and continued giving him verbal commands to stand up. Chad continued to ignore the commands and remained seated. I was able to observe 3 bodies of juvenile boys in the front yard. I grabbed Chad by the left arm and placed him onto the ground. After Chad was in custody, I ran to and the 3 juveniles to assess injuries. In an attempt to get the kids to the medic sooner, I grabbed one and ran towards the roadway. The Claremont County prosecutor, Mark Takove, told reporters that he will be seeking the death penalty in this case.
I want to start out by expressing the deepest sympathy I have for his family, for this unspeakable tragedy. We do have, I can't go into a whole lot of facts, all right, because this is a death penalty case, and my goal is to have this man executed for slaughtering these 3 little boys. Let me try to figure out a way to put this. It is an incomprehensible act of horror he perpetrated on his family. So again, that is my most important focus right now, is to ensure that they're protected and they're safe. And my hope and wish and prayer is that someday they will be able to find peace.
Absolutely. I think that is everyone's hope watching this case, and justice for Clayton, Hunter, and Chase, their mother, their sister, and everybody who loved them so much. Let's talk a little bit more about this case. The prosecutor being very clear about what's going to happen next from the state's standpoint. And good for him making it clear to the public. A lot of times we have to wait, don't we, when we watch criminal cases like this one. We don't know what the state's going to do in terms of death penalty pursuit, but this prosecutor is firm in his beliefs and going to stand firm in the pursuit of justice for these young boys. Let me bring back in my guest, trial attorney Don Malarsic, also trial advocacy professor. He is death penalty certified, practices in the Akron-Cleveland area of Ohio. Susan Constantine, human behavior expert, jury consultant based in Orlando, Florida, also someone who knows an awful lot about domestic violence, has done wonderful work in the prevention movement and work with victims. Dawn, I want to begin with you, please. You were telling us in the last segment how you'd be assembling your team if you were representing this guy and you had to look back in all the history, and you were giving us the various examples of all the things you need to know in order to try to save his life if you're his counsel. Part of that process, we know, would be talking to him, going to the jail, doing those jail visits where you ask him questions. If you were representing Chad Doerman, Don, what would be the things you would be asking him? Essentially, what do you want to know from him, and what's going to help you in his defense, please?
Well, Julie, you know, my experience is traditionally clients are not very good historians of their background, and they just aren't. So I wouldn't expect him to be the person who's going to give me all that information. I would want to talk to him to make sure he understands the process. I want to make sure that we have a relationship, that he trusts me, and he's going to be able to follow my advice. And that's not easy to do. When you're court appointed, you're thrown in there. He's in a very, very difficult situation. So you have to earn that trust. But you really want to start talking to family members. You want to start talking to people who knew him, counselors, school people, coaches, workers, neighbors, all those individuals. And that's quite frankly a better historian, because my guess is right now you want to know the why. And my guess is that Chad Doerman probably doesn't himself know the why. So your job is to find out people who can shed some light on that key issue, which is why.
Oh, I really like how you put that, Don. Thank you for that. I mean, it's something I think everybody watching this case is struggling with tremendously. Why those boys were loved. If he didn't want them, someone would have loved them. It's hard to wrap your mind around why these boys' lives had to be ended so brutally. I mean, this is something very upsetting to think about, but surely the state's going to talk about it in their case presentation. They were shot at close range with a high-powered rifle. 7-year-old Clayton, 4-year-old Hunter, and 3-year-old Chase. It's just horrific. And there were indicators. We know the next-door neighbor that one of our Scripps correspondents spoke with, telling her that, yeah, he yelled at those kids and yelled at his wife every single day. Emotional abuse, psychological abuse is abuse. Anybody at home, anybody who's in an abusive relationship right now, if it's emotional, psychological, it's going to escalate. Get out now. Susan Constantine, can we talk a little bit about how a lot of people may not realize, through no fault of their own, I didn't realize this till I studied this stuff and was blown away, that it all starts with the psychological abuse, the verbal stuff, the emotional stuff. The violence just doesn't happen one day. When you have a person who uses violence like Chad Doerman, it starts in increments, doesn't it?
Yes, and then to your other guest's point, it started, Julie, before that. So it didn't start just with him. Where was he abused? Where was he talked down to? Where was the emotional abuse in his past? Where did he feel like he was a defeatist? Where was this anger coming from? And if I were to meet with him one-on-one, I would use a technique that's called empathy-based listening. All I want to do is I want to hear him talk. I'm not going to ask him who, what, when, where, and why. I want him just to open up, and I want him to start telling me a story about whatever it is that he wants to tell me about. And that's interesting when you listen to it, what comes up first. And when he starts to build that trust and rapport, you start to really develop a baseline for what his past was like and why this happened.
This is fascinating, Susan. Quickly, please, give us an example of what you would say to spark that kind of conversation with him.
Well, first of all, what I would do is to minimize. I would minimize what he'd done and say, listen, I knew this was a horrible thing. I know that you're just as shocked as everybody else is, and I don't think that this is probably you. I think this was probably something that just happened. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And just let him roll. So you don't want to say, why did you kill your sons?
Right.
You know, what made you do that? I want to minimize it. And I know that your other guest knows this, is they're minimizing techniques, as it's using investigative, interrogative interviewing. It's a kind of 101. You never bring it out. You never cast blame. The whole point is you want to understand, not to have compassion, but to have empathy. You've got to actually remove all your own biases, your own thinking, and start to walk the trail with him throughout his life and find out where in the areas of his life was fractured that brought him to this place.
This is fascinating stuff. Susan Constantine, Don Milarczyk, I could talk to you both all night, but we have to let you both go. Thank you so much for the great analysis. Have a wonderful holiday weekend. We'll see you back on Court TV very soon.